Bill Toomey, running in the footsteps of Jim Thorpe and Rafer Johnson and Bob Mathias. Running in the cold and the dark of Mexico City, in the breathless air, winning the decathlon.
Thanks for staying up later. This is the first of two programs with ABC's Jim McKay, the most honored sportscaster in the history of his business. He's received 12 Emmys, 11 of them in various categories for sports coverage, and a unique 12th, which was in the category of news for his coverage of the tragedy at the Munich Olympics in 1972. But before we talk about the Olympics and wide world of sports and all the other things you've been associated with, I would imagine that viewers are not as familiar with your beginnings in broadcasting. You broadcast a horse race from Pimlico in Baltimore at a time when there were fewer than 500 TV sets in the city.
Oh, if that many, because that was the first television program ever seen in the city of Baltimore. I was the first voice ever heard on television in the city of Baltimore. And of course, the television sets that did exist were in bars, almost all of them, or almost none in anybody's home. In fact, the program was sponsored by National Beer. Just a week or two ago, I bumped into a man I hadn't seen in 40 years who was a sales manager at that time, and he said, I used to go around to as many bars as I could cover to make sure that they had the show on at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This was different. The horse racing was the first day. Shortly after, we started this 3 to 6 every afternoon show that was very big in the bars. So the only people who were watching us were people who went to bars at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Now, you had started out as a newspaper man, then made the transition to television. A guy like Red Barber, who had a long history in radio when TV arrived, perhaps had a different perspective, but I'll never forget what he said. He broadcast the first Major League Baseball game seen on television, and when he came down out of the booth, someone asked him how he felt about it, and he said in that southern drawl, I'm not number one anymore. I'm number two. That camera, from now on, is number one. He perceived it exactly the first time out of the box. How did you see it?
Well, that's a very good way to put it. He's, of course, he was one of the best and still is on that little one he does on National Public Radio once a week. I like to think maybe we're 1 and 1A anyway, but it's an entirely different technique, as you know so well, from radio. We annotate, we write the captions, we point out, and I think also anticipate to say, listen, you know, if Arnold Palmer does this, and then Nicholas does that, and the other guy does this, that'll set up this situation so that people can begin to get excited and enjoy what might happen.
Yeah, it's very important to frame the drama and outline the options for the viewer.
But I like television very much. As you know, I've done very little radio because went directly from city-side reporting. I wasn't in the sports department. Was dragooned out of the city room one day and put on this television station. I remember 2 assistant managing editors came to get 4 of us out of the city room with this secretive thing. They were going to go in the air with this television station, wanted to beat the Hearst paper on the air with the television station. And I said, why me? And they said, well, didn't you say you were president of the Dramatic Society at Loyola College? I said, yeah. They said, that's good enough for us. They said, we're going to run the station. We don't know anything either. But then neither do the viewers.
That being president of the Dramatic Society and listing Bing Crosby as one of your 3 idols as a kid, along with the great sports writer Red Smith and the pioneer broadcaster Ted Husing, I know that you were happy to get a chance to use some of those dramatic skills on a show called The Sports Parade, which was one of the few sports broadcasts where the announcer got to sing.
Absolutely right, and that happened on the 3rd day. It was a 3-hour show. That's one I was mentioning, sponsored by National Beer at that time. And we had entertainers, and we told them each to have 3 numbers ready each day. And I don't know whether we had 4 entertainers, whatever. By the 3rd day, they had run through everything. We still had a half an hour to go, and there weren't any more race results coming in or anybody else left to interview. So I sang a song. And so from then on, I sang a song every day.
She always the same old shillelagh me father brought from Ireland, and divil a man could talk to him as he walked with it in his hand. He'd lead the band on Paddy's Day and twirl it round his mitt, and divil a bit should laugh at it, her dad would have a fit. Sure, it's the same old shillelagh me father could lick a dozen men. As fast as they got up a gutter, he'd bash 'em down again. And many's the time he used it on me to make me understand. The same old shillelagh me father brought from Ireland. Hey.
I came out of the studio at 6 o'clock in the evening, and our general manager, a man named Jack Jett, was standing there with a guy about my height, hair slicked straight on back, and a big cigar, I swear. And he said, "I'd like you to meet Mr. Dick Swift from CBS in New York." And Dick Swift said, quote, "Hiya, kid. How would you like to do something like this in New York?" And it was right out of the old Hollywood movie. And I thought he meant sports. It wasn't until a month or so later when we got squared away, I realized he wanted me to do a variety show. And I came to New York to do a variety show, which they had decided to call The Real McKay. And so they changed my name from McManus, which it is, to McKay. That's where that came from.
Have you ever regretted that it isn't your real name that's out there before the public?
In a way, but in another way, it gives you a little extra privacy at times. And my son, Sean, whom you know, is known as Sean McManus, and everything he's done is on his own, and there's not the confusion of the father and son in the business and all that sort of thing. It works out, but the name on our mailbox is still James K. McManus.
Like a lot of broadcasters who were around in the early days of television, before the specialty developed that the public would eventually come to know the person for, most of them did a wide variety of things. Mike Wallace was an actor, and he was also a host of shows that couldn't really be called news shows. They were sort of quasi-journalistic shows. And you had a long list like that as well. Quiz programs, court programs, a morning show with Walter Cronkite.
Yeah, I was the second banana on the morning show, as it was simply called, with Walter Cronkite. The first show to go up against the Today Show, which, of course, was Dave Garroway at that time. And, you know, a couple of years ago, Walter took the trouble to look it up and found that to this day, we had the highest CBS morning rating. And that was
take
fun.
that, Paula Zahn and Harry Smith.
So I did the sports on that show, but also I was the man on the street doing the interviews and things. You know the Roger Bannister story? Well,
Bannister was the man who broke the 4-minute mile.
Roger Bannister was the first man to break the 4-minute mile. And we got a producer named Hugh Beach, a wonderful, colorful guy. He'd been an English professor at Colby College, but he referred to himself as Meathead, colorful guy. And he appeared at our apartment one night, and he said to my wife, he said, "You and your husband and I are going out to Idlewild Airport, as it was then called, tomorrow morning, and we're going to steal a story." I said, "Well, what's going on?" He said, "Just before I left the office, I saw a note to editors on the teletype that said, a man believed to be Roger Bannister, the runner, boarded Pan Am flight so-and-so for New York, although he was on the list as, you know, Joe Blow or something." So we decided to take a chance, took a mobile unit out. This was a live show, of course, 6:30 in the morning, and just waited for him to come through customs. The plane was late. 7 minutes to 9, he came through customs. We're going off the air at 9. I just walked up to him and said, "Dr. Bannister, Jim McKay, CBS, tell us about the 4-minute mile." And he did 5 beautiful minutes in well-cadenced English. Said, "Thank you very much." And then we went off the air, a guy came running up to me and said, "You can't do that. What are you doing?" I said, "Why can't we do it? We're doing a news interview with Roger Bannister." I said, "Why can't we do it?" He said, "Because we brought him over." I said, "Who is we?" He said, "I've got a secret, our show." So he went from there down to I've Got a Secret to the rehearsal. They started running through the commercials. He saw Winston cigarettes. He said, "Excuse me, is that going to be on the program?" And they said, "Yes, it is." He said, "Well, I couldn't possibly appear on a program that was sponsored by cigarettes." And he walked out of the studio and he went home. We got the only interview with him.
As I recall, the Today Show with Dave Garroway had the chimp, J. Fred Muggs.
Right.
But not so well remembered is that the morning show, hosted by Cronkite, with you as a contributor, had some sort of little lion or something, or Charlemagne or something?
Sure, yeah. You're not supposed to be that old. You're not supposed to know about that. That was the Baird puppets, Bill and Cora Baird. And they used to do musical numbers on the show. And they'd have their characters do them, kind of like the old hit parade used to be. Only these were puppets. They were very, very clever. And Charlemagne was sort of the star.
Don't you laugh sometimes or nod knowingly when television critics will take a shot at a sports announcer for going on the David Letterman show, or maybe doing something that seems off the beaten path of sports, and then you think of some of the true journalistic giants. You think of Walter Cronkite with Charlemagne and Edward R. Murrow in Lauren Bacall's house.
Yes.
You know, on See It Now or whatever, which certainly could not have been called a journalistic endeavor.
Walter Cronkite was the host of the 1960 Squaw Valley Olympics. No, not too many people remember that.
Did you work on those Olympics?
No, I was supposed to, and I got sick. I got pneumonia. And I remember saying to my wife, I said, honey, that's something I would have loved to have done, and now I'll never get a chance to do an Olympics. But I did.
Your hands feel colder when you leave your home. Don't your eyes look older when you make your own? Understand then I dream until my head aches, oh no, and my dream ain't yet begun. I read it in the paper, someone happens every day.
We're back now with Jim McKay. So you had this varied background, television in Baltimore, once covered Truman's inauguration, kids shows, a courtroom program, sports on the radio, and then all of a sudden in the early 60s, Roone Arledge, budding genius, as The View from the Rearview Mirror would tell us later,
yes,
says, you're the guy I want to host this new concept in sports television. How did he explain it to you?
Well, I actually was covering the Masters golf tournament for CBS, and somebody came up to me in the golf course and said, they've been calling you from ABC in New York. And I said, who? And he said, some guy, Ronnie Aldrich, I think. And I went back and I called, and it was Roone, whom I had never met, and Chet Simmons actually on the phone, both of them at that time. And they said, we're going to do a summer replacement show, 20 weeks. It'll cover a lot of sports. I've always remembered he said, it'll involve a certain amount of travel. And I said, you mean all over the country, all over the world, you know, and passed by that quickly. Would you be interested? We're checking a number of people's availability. And I said, yeah, I would. It sounds like fun.
Are there any particular wide world memories that stand out for you, moments on the program?
That's always difficult, isn't it? There's probably only 6,000 of them. But, well, you know, the first show was the Penn and Drake relays, both live on the same day, which would be a pretty good trick even today, wouldn't it?
I'm Jim McKay at Franklin Field in Philadelphia for the 67th annual Penn Relay Carnival. Out in Des Moines, Iowa, the 52nd annual Drake Relays are also underway. And in just a moment, we'll bring you all the excitement and drama of both the Penn and the Drake Relays on ABC's Wide World of Sports.
That's the way it began. And we almost went off the air in the middle of the first summer. And it was only when we went to Moscow, to the Soviet Union, to cover the U.S.-Soviet track meet that we began to get a little press, a little bit of attention, just enough to keep us on for the rest of the summer. And things began to build a little bit from there. We went off as scheduled around Labor Day. Last show we did, in fact, I remember, was an exhibition game of the old AFL on which we mic'd the quarterback. First time anybody had done that. And the quarterback's name was Jack Kemp.
The quarterback of the San Diego Chargers, Jack Kemp, number 15 of Occidental College, 6 feet tall,
202 pounds. Your microphone comfortable there, boy?
That's fine, Jim. Thank
All right, good luck to you, Jack.
you very much. Let's go full right, 91 quick. Flare one, fire out on the set.
Sounds like a very similar play again. It worked before, so I guess Jackie Kemp's going to come back with about the same thing.
19, get it!
It is the same play. There's Norton.
But Tom Moore, who was then the president of ABC, made the commitment before we went off the air. He said, I'm going to put you back. He was from the South. I'm going to put you back on in January and try this as a regular weekly show. And they even paid me through the fall, imagine, to keep myself available. And now it's beginning to look like steady work.
Who wrote those words at the beginning of Wide World of Sports, spanning the globe, the thrill of victory?
Well, the first summer we were on, the words were different.
Sports, in its unending variety, unfolds on ABC's Wide World of Sports, capturing the sight and sound, the emotion, the beauty and history-making achievements wherever men gather to compete in this great wide world of athletics.
And then we went off at Labor Day, came back on in January, and Roone said, we got to get new words for the opening. And as usual, it was the last minute. We were going up to record the opening. We didn't have any words, and we sat down and, no doubt on the back of an envelope, scribbled the words down. I think we sort of did them together.
So you did it the same fashion that Lincoln wrote the Gettysburg Address
well, of course,
on the back of an
as
envelope.
I say, that has to be on the backs of envelopes. No, obviously we had no clue that almost 30 years later, we'd still be using those same words.
Spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of sport, the thrill of victory, and the agony of defeat.
Where is that poor son of a gun who goes tumbling down the hill every week?
The immortal Vinko Bogataj?
Now we go to Vinko Bogataj, the Yugoslavian, the youngster. His inexperience, he fell on his first jump.
A lot of speed in that track. Now, look out! Look at him go! Oh! Oh, baby.
What a terrible...
A couple of times for our anniversary programs. I remember we had him over, it would have been the year after Lake Placid, I guess, 20th anniversary, something like that. And he and the Olympic hockey team were the only people who got standing ovations at the dinner. He had no clue why he was famous over here. He's not famous in Yugoslavia. Nobody knows who he is there. He's just a kind of an intermediate ski jumper at one point. But he's become a legend here.
This, then, is a historic performance you're watching right now in gymnastics.
She's Kathy Rigby's size. Oh, my... Wow!
Olga Korbut.
Little did you realize at the time, but I'm sure it dawned on you fairly quickly, that doing Wide World of Sports was the best possible sort of training to be an effective anchor and reporter on the Olympics.
Oh, sure, and I think all of our ABC coverage grew out of Wide World, technically as well as production and commentary, you know. Yeah, it was perfect.
Because obviously, Wide World encompassed a lot of Olympic sports, and even if the sport in question on a particular Saturday on Wide World wasn't an Olympic sport, the way to cover it was the Olympic style. Americans are interested in baseball, football, basketball, in part because of the personalities and the individual stories of the competitors, but also largely just because of the outcome of the games.
Yeah.
You can show them a game and not tell them anything about the competitors. It might not be quite as full a broadcasting experience, but they still care about the outcome. But if you're going to cover downhill skiing or some 12-year-old girl on the parallel bars in gymnastics, the only way to bring that home to people is to make them know who these competitors are and frame the drama for them in a compelling fashion. That's what Wide World did, and then it just carried over to the Olympics.
Well, you've summed up exactly what was our idea. We knew that we had to get them interested in the people before we could get them interested in the sports. Also, Roone would always, if we were bringing in a sport that was going to be tough to introduce, which at that time included such sports as gymnastics and figure skating, he would put it on with the Demolition Derby or some obvious action piece that would get a pretty good rating, but then the people would see this other sport and say, hey, that's kind of interesting. And in time, they could stand on their own.
I think it's fair to say, and I'm sure you wouldn't bristle at this characterization, that your dispatches from all these far-flung locations were not, they didn't have the feel of, here is the smartest man I ever met who knows more than anybody I've ever met, and now he's telling me some of it. They had the feel of, here's a fairly smart guy, a very curious guy, and he's found out a lot of the things that I would like to find out if I were lucky enough to go there and be able to walk around for a couple of weeks. They didn't have a pedantic feel to them. They didn't have a talk down to the audience feel. It was sort of like, hey, if you could only be here, I'm sure you would have gone here, and I'm sure you would have asked this or that, and I did it for you.
Well, that's about the way it was, and I've always been curious, and I've always liked trivia things, and the small thing almost, you know, better than the big thing sometimes. I remember one time I was riding from the to the airport in Zurich, Switzerland to go home, and one of our young production assistants was with me. We're riding along the taxi cab, and after a while he said, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, why am I doing what? He said, well, every time we go past a side street, he said, you're giving it this. And I thought, well, that's what it's about, looking down all the side streets, you know? I just want to see what's there.
This wraps it up for our first show with Jim McKay. Tomorrow night, we concentrate on the Olympics, the Lake Placid hockey victory, the tragedy in Munich in 1972, and whatever else a half hour allows. And until then, see you later.